Halloween 1983, when innocent fun turned into a nightmare. A lost boy with a chilling presence, and four friends who never knew what true fear was. Are you brave enough to hear the full story? Halloween 1983 in Fairfield, Illinois. A night when the streets came alive with laughter, spooky costumes, and the glow of jack-o'-lanterns. For most, it was a time of innocent fun and sugary indulgence. But what happened that night to four young friends turned their joy into one of the darkest stories the town had ever known. Eric, 13 years old, loved Halloween. For him, it was more than just candy. It was the one night where the world transformed into a place full of mystery and magic. That morning, he had woken up earlier than usual, excited to dress up as Dracula. His mother, a natural at crafting the perfect costume, painted his face pale and gave him a sharp, sinister look. When Eric got to school, the day started like any other Halloween. Kids comparing costumes, laughing, and showing off their spooky attire. Eric's Dracula costume, as always, was a big hit. His friends Andrew, Heath, and Shane were also dressed to impress, and by the end of the school day, they were already planning their trick-or-treating adventure. The plan was simple. Meet at the church parking lot at 5 p.m., then hit every neighborhood until their pillowcases were bursting with candy. Eric could hardly contain his excitement as he counted down the minutes at home, watching cartoons and imagining the loot they would collect. As the clock struck 5 p.m., Eric bolted out the door, pillowcase in hand. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set. When he arrived at the parking lot, Heath and Shane were already there, buzzing with excitement about their plans. Andrew, as usual, was running a few minutes late. The four friends finally set off, their laughter echoing through the streets as they moved from house to house. Each doorbell rang out a promise of candy, and their bags quickly grew heavier. The streets were alive with other kids in costumes, their voices filling the air with a festive buzz. For Eric, it was shaping up to be one of the best Halloween nights ever. But just as the sky turned darker and the playful energy of the night began to fade, the boys heard a voice behind them. "Can I join you guys? I think I'm lost." Startled, they turned to see a small boy standing a few feet away. He was wearing an old, tattered mask that covered his face completely, and he clutched a rusty metal pail in his small hands. His costume wasn't like the bright, fun outfits they'd seen all night. It was unsettlingly plain, like it belonged to a different time. The boy was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with a quiet, timid voice that didn't match the eerie vibe he gave off. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to make of him. "Sure, kid," Andrew said with a shrug. "You can tag along until we figure out where you belong." Shane leaned in close to Heath and whispered, "I don't know, man. He's a stranger. Feels weird." But Heath, always the leader of the group, brushed it off. "It's fine. He's just a kid." The boy nodded silently and began following them. But even as he walked with them, he kept a slight distance, his presence strangely quiet. Unlike them, he didn't talk or laugh. He didn't even ring the doorbells himself. Instead, he would step up after them, holding out his metal pail without saying a word. The people handing out candy would hesitate, glancing at the boy's mask before dropping candy into his pail. His silence and stillness were unnerving, but the friends tried to laugh it off. "He's just shy," Eric muttered, trying to convince himself. But deep down, they all felt it. Something wasn't right. As the night deepened, the streets began to quiet down. Porch lights flickered off one by one, signaling the end of trick-or-treating for most kids. But Eric and his friends weren't ready to call it a night just yet. With their pillowcases already half full, they decided to hit a few outlying houses outside the main neighborhoods, hoping for big rewards from families eager to get rid of leftover candy. The strange boy continued to follow them, staying a few steps behind. His small frame and peculiar mask made him seem almost harmless. At least, that's what Eric tried to tell himself. But as they walked, his unease grew. There was something unnatural about how quiet the boy was, how he didn't seem to blink or show any sign of emotion. The group whispered among themselves. His pail's already full. Why is he still tagging along? Shane muttered, his voice low but sharp. Maybe he's just scared to be alone, Heath replied, trying to sound confident. Let's just hit these last few houses and figure it out later. The boy didn't respond to their murmurs. He simply trudged behind them, his metal pail swinging in eerie silence. When they reached the first outlying house, it was exactly as they'd hoped. The homeowners were generous, handing out huge handfuls of candy to each of them. The excitement of scoring a jackpot momentarily distracted the boys from their unease. But when it was a strange boy's turn, the atmosphere shifted. He approached the door slowly, his mask hiding any expression he might have. The homeowner, a friendly older man, smiled and said, "Well, aren't you a spooky one?" But as the boy extended his metal pail, he didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring. The man hesitated, his smile faltering. He dropped a single piece of candy into the pail, but the boy didn't move. He just kept staring, his masked face tilted slightly upward, as if he were trying to study the man. Happy Halloween," the man said nervously, stepping back and closing the door. The boys exchanged uneasy glances as the boy rejoined their group without a word. "Okay, that was weird," Andrew muttered under his breath. "Let's just finish this and head home," Eric said, his earlier excitement now replaced with a gnawing sense of dread. The next house was similar. The boy's silent, intense presence made the homeowner visibly uncomfortable. By the time they reached the third house, the tension was unbearable. "Kid, are you sure you don't know where you live?" Heath asked, his voice tinged with frustration. The boy turned his masked face toward Heath and simply said, "No. Well, then maybe you should." Before Heath could finish, the boy suddenly interrupted, his voice low and monotone. "I just want to stay with you until I find what I'm looking for." The group froze, the weight of his words settling heavily in the cold night air. "What does that mean?" Shane asked, his voice shaking. The boy didn't answer. He just turned and started walking toward the next house, as if nothing had happened. After hitting a few more houses, they finally arrived at the last one, the furthest house on their route. It stood alone by the edge of a dark lake, its front porch illuminated by a single flickering light. The house had an old, weathered look, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. "Are we sure about this?" Eric asked, eyeing the lake uneasily. "It's the last one," he said. "Let's just get it over with." As they approached the porch, the boy hesitated. For the first time that night, he seemed reluctant to follow them. "Come on, kid," Eric called back, his voice tinged with impatience. The boy finally moved, his steps slow and deliberate. The group rang the doorbell, their usual excitement replaced with a tense silence. When the door opened, a woman in her early 30s greeted them with a warm smile. "Well, don't you all look great?" she said cheerfully. Behind her, two young children, still in their costumes, were playing at a table in the background. Trick or treat. The boys chimed half-heartedly. The woman laughed and began handing out candy. But then, without warning, the strange boy stepped forward, pushing past Eric and standing directly in front of her. "Hello, Mommy," he said, his voice unervingly calm. The woman's smile vanished instantly. The candy bowl slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. Her face twisted into an expression of pure terror. "No, it can't be," she whispered, backing away. Her reaction froze everyone in place. The air seemed to thicken as the boy reached up and slowly removed his mask, revealing a pale, expressionless face. "How did you find us?" the woman gasped, her voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the house, his movements deliberate and slow. "Jim!" the woman screamed, her voice piercing the silence. "He found us." At that moment, the boys realized they had made a terrible mistake. What was supposed to be a night of innocent fun had turned into something far darker than they could have ever imagined. The house loomed in the darkness, its warm glow now seeming ominous as Eric, Heath, Shane, and Andrew stood frozen on the porch. The young boy moved past them, his old mask in one hand, the metal pail in the other. For a moment, everything seemed eerily normal. But then he looked up at the woman who had answered the door, her cheerful smile instantly fading. "Hello, Mommy. I finally found you," the boy said in a voice devoid of emotion. The words struck like a thunderclap. The woman's face turned ghostly pale as the candy bowl slipped from her trembling hands, shattering on the wooden floor. No, this can't be," she stammered, backing away. "How did you find us?" The boy said nothing, his gaze fixed on her as he stepped forward. His movements were calm, deliberate, but there was something in his eyes, something inhuman. The boy stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Suddenly, the woman screamed, calling out for her husband. The sound shattered the silence, and chaos erupted. The husband burst into the room, his confusion quickly replaced by terror as his eyes locked on the boy. No, this isn't possible," he shouted, his voice breaking. The boy smiled a twisted, eerie smile. "Daddy," he said softly, "I told you I'd find you." Without warning, the boy lunged at the man with an unnatural speed, tackling him to the ground. Eric watched in horror as the boy tore at the man's throat, blood spilling onto the floor in dark, glistening pools. The man struggled, but the boy's strength was monstrous. The woman's screams filled the house as she grabbed her younger children and tried to run, but the boy wasn't done. He turned his attention to her, his smile fading into a blank, soulless stare. "Run!" Andrew's voice snapped Eric out of his paralysis. Heath grabbed Eric by the arm, dragging him off the porch as Shane sprinted ahead. Their candy bags lay forgotten, their only thought to escape the nightmare unfolding behind them. Eric's legs felt like lead as he stumbled into the yard, his breath ragged. A crash from inside the house sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He turned to look back, only to see the boy standing in the doorway, blood dripping from his hands. "He's coming!" Shane screamed, his voice trembling with fear. The group scattered, each boy running in a different direction. Eric bolted toward the woods, the thick trees swallowing him as he ran blindly into the night. Branches tore at his costume, the ground uneven beneath his feet. Behind him, he could hear faint footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Suddenly, the ground gave way, and Eric plunged into icy water. He surfaced with a gasp, realizing he'd fallen into the lake near the house. Treading water, Eric looked back toward the shore. His heart stopped as he saw the boy standing at the edge, staring at him with those unblinking eyes. Then, without hesitation, the boy stepped into the water, moving toward Eric with terrifying purpose. Eric's instincts kicked in, and he began to swim as fast as he could. The cold water sapped his strength, but the thought of the boy catching him kept him going. Every stroke felt like a battle as he struggled to stay ahead. When he finally reached the other side, Eric stumbled out of the water, his legs shaking. He looked back to see the boy emerging from the lake, his mask gone, his face pale and expressionless. Desperation fueled Eric as he clawed his way up the muddy bank. His hands slipped, his shoes sliding on the wet earth, but he forced himself upward. The boy was getting closer, his steps unnaturally calm despite the mud and water. With one final push, Eric reached the top of the embankment and ran into the woods, not daring to look back. By the time the sun rose, Eric was exhausted, his body shaking from the cold and fear. He wandered through the trees until he stumbled upon a farmhouse. The family inside took him in and called the sheriff, who later reunited him with his parents. Eric learned that his friends had also escaped, flagging down help at a nearby house. But when the sheriff's deputies arrived at the outlier home, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. The parents were discovered in the living room, their throats savagely torn. The two children who had fled were found in the woods nearby, victims of the same gruesome fate. In the house, deputies found old family photographs that revealed the truth. The boy who had followed Eric and his friends was the family's eldest child, presumed dead years earlier. How he had returned, and how he had become the monster they encountered, remained a chilling mystery. The only trace of him was a line of muddy footprints leading to Anne from the lake. And so, Halloween 1983 became a haunting legend in Fairfield, Illinois. A chilling tale passed down in whispers, yet still shrouded in mystery. What really happened that night? If this story left you unsettled, be sure to subscribe for more spine-tingling tales from the unknown. Share your thoughts on what you think truly happened to the boy in the comments below. And stay tuned for more terrifying stories.